Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, so glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away, and here in his place, we're thrilled to have Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, contributing editor at National Review Online, Fox News contributor, author of Ball of Collusion, among many other excellent works, and like me, a miserable NFL fan, especially after yesterday where his Jets really didn't show up and neither did my Bears. So, Andy, we'll keep that to a very minimum today. Nobody wants to hear us moan about it. But anyway, glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Greg. As usual, I'm always envious of Jim for one reason or another when I get to come on and do this with you. And I'm really envious today because he doesn't have to show his face after that debacle in the desert yesterday. But here I am. So.
That's right. You're right. You're always ready to go. So first of all, before we get to our three martinis today, it is Veterans Day, marked, of course, because this is the day that World War I came to an end, November 11th, 1918. But it's also the day that we celebrate all who have worn the uniform honorably. We know Memorial Day is for those who gave their lives for this country. Veterans Day for all who have served, and we're so grateful for that. I was just telling Andy before we started that the reason I was gone on Thursday and I was really gone on Friday, we had that special edition, and looking back at the election that we taped ahead of time, was because I was for 3 days interviewing heroes. Andy, I got to tell you, if you want to get a shot of confidence that our country was and is in great hands with the young people in our military and those who were young 80 years ago as they stormed the beaches of Normandy and Iwo Jima and all that. I got to tell you, it was an amazing time, and it just makes you even more grateful for those who have put their lives on the line for our country.
Yeah, it really is a remarkable thing. You know, when I was a kid, it was Vietnam era, and we had a draft that obviously creates a bunch of its own. And I think it was a fine thing for the military to go over to a really sort of professional force of warriors who are in the service because they want to be in the service, because they want to sacrifice for their country. And it is the highest form of service. And we take it for granted too much because we wouldn't have the security and especially the prosperity that America has unless we had very brave Americans who are willing to put themselves on the line for their country. So I just think it's the highest form of service to the United States, and I'm glad that we have not 1 but 2 days to show reverence for that.
Absolutely right. And if you've got a neighbor, you got a friend, you see somebody in the grocery store with one of those hats on, it's a World War II vet or a Vietnam vet, thank them for their service, not just today, but anytime you see them. Their service is what makes this country great. So, Andy, let's get to our first martini here, right up your alley. And this was really actually the day after the election. Jim and I had so much to go over that we didn't get to this, but the Department of Justice, after so much work with special counsel Jack Smith, well, Judge Cannon threw out the case in Florida, saying that he, that's the classified docs case, saying that he wasn't rightfully appointed, but he still had the January 6th case here in Washington, D.C. But as soon as we saw that Trump was officially the president-elect, the DOJ backing down, and not on January 20th, it looks like they're going to unwind right away. Here's Ken Delaney of NBC explaining what's happening.
Yeah, Chris, it's not a surprise that these cases can't go forward when Donald Trump takes office. What's interesting here is that the DOJ is moving to end them even before he takes office, citing the long-standing DOJ policy that sitting presidents can't be prosecuted. And there was some thought that maybe Special Counsel Jack Smith was going to sprint through the finish line, was going to work up until the last day, force Trump to fire him, wait till a new attorney general was appointed. But that does not appear to be the thinking inside the department. The thinking is that these cases can't go forward. There's no reasonable prospect of getting to trial within the 3 months before Donald Trump takes office.
And so, Andy, then there's the question of the cases that have already taken place, specifically the one in New York City that Alvin Bragg brought, the whole Stormy Daniels hush money case, 34 convictions. But now that situation is going to be resolved here in the next couple weeks. The Associated Press saying that Judge Juan Merchan has said he will issue a written opinion Tuesday, tomorrow, on Trump's request to toss his conviction in either order a new trial or dismiss the indictment entirely. If he doesn't toss it, sentencing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. So as you look at this, both from the federal perspective and also the local in New York City, what do you expect to happen here, especially on those 34 counts?
Let's start with the federal, because I think, we ought to say a few things about what we just heard from that commentator. The interesting thing is not that the Justice Department is moving quickly to dispose of the case. I do agree that it's interesting that Jack Smith is not sprinting to the finish line. I actually thought that there was a chance prior to the election, especially if it was kind of a mixed result where it was very thin, Trump won. There was real possibility that Harris could contest the result of the election, and particularly if she won the popular vote and he won only an electoral college majority, I thought that there was a very real possibility not only that Smith would continue and that Chutkan would encourage him to continue, but that would be a kind of a dance in conjunction with Democrats in Congress, particularly if the Democrats had won the House, certainly, but both houses of Congress we were up for grabs before the election. I thought what might happen if the Democrats had a better night was they would try to use Smith's prosecution to argue that Trump should not be seated under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Remember, when the Supreme Court decided that last term, what they said was that the states can't impose a procedure to execute Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which is the disqualification based on being an insurrectionist. And the Supreme Court said the states can't do it, but they didn't say the feds couldn't do it. So I thought that was going to be a mess on January 6th. I did think that Trump would ultimately prevail, but I also thought it could be very complex and very bruising. It turns out, Greg, I think because of the sweeping nature of Trump's victory, which I don't like to use the word landslide because, I was a kid when Nixon won what was actually a landslide. And Reagan in 84, what he won was actually a landslide. This is not a popular landslide in that sense. But given how divided the country is, this is about as sweeping as it gets. I think Trump will win the ultimate electoral count by about 312 to 226, I think, if that's the right number. Yep. But he'll also win the popular vote by about 7 million, which is astonishing considering that he lost the popular vote by about 3 million when he won election in 2016. So I think Democrats, and this I think is healthy for the country. I think they're assessing this and realizing that lawfare, which they hoped would carry them to victory, turns out to have been counterproductive. Now, you can argue about whether it was wholly counterproductive, because I think they wanted to run against Trump. They wanted him to get nominated, and it did help Trump get nominated. But I think the way that it played out, and in particular the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, which really put the main prosecutions on ice in a way that couldn't get them to trial prior to the election, which is what the Democrats were counting on. I think that really hurt them. And in the end, it looks like lawfare was broadly rejected by the public, which is healthy, I think, for the United States, because we don't want to be a banana republic type nation where, one side is encouraged to put its political opponents on trial. So the fact that people seem to have been turned off by that, I think, is a sign of good health in the republic. And the fact that the Democrats seem to be taking that in is also a good sign of health, not only for the Republic, but for the Democrats, because I think for their own purposes, they need to get away from woke progressivism and this whole idea that we should be weaponizing legal processes. So I think this would be good for Democrats, it'd be good for the country. There's more going on here, though, than meets the eye. That commentator that you just played, the thing here is the Justice Department policy to which he alluded says that you can't proceed against a sitting president. You can't indict or prosecute a sitting president. It doesn't say that you have to dismiss cases that have already been brought. So the Justice Department could have suspended the case until Trump got out of office so that it would at least be viable. They could have, proceeded. Instead, they're deciding to dismiss it, which is a big difference. And I suspect, I really do, that part of what's going on here is that President Biden is going to pardon Hunter. I don't think there's any question about that. I know they keep saying he's not, but, look, if it was your son, if it was my son, and I was the only one in the country who had power to do it, I would do it. And I expect he's going to do it. Now, because it's a form of self-dealing, and because he has vowed that he wouldn't do it, he's going to get a lot of criticism when he does it. But I think if it's pitched to the country not as a pardon for Hunter, but kind of a clemency package where we just turn the page from all of this stuff, the Hunter stuff goes away, the Trump stuff goes away, I think the country takes that down a lot easier than it would just a Hunter pardon. So I think they have an eye on the Hunter case, and that has driven them to do the right thing, which is not just to suspend the Trump proceedings, but actually to get rid of them.
And then, as you point out in a column, I don't want to give away too much, but if in fact Merchan doesn't dismiss the case tomorrow and does go to sentencing, and even if he does sentence him to jail time, there's an appeals process that plays out so that Trump would still be sworn in, and then he's president, and then you get to probably a point where not much happens there too, right?
That's interesting because the incentives have changed. The whole point of that Bragg exercise was lawfare, right? It was to bruise up Trump prior to the election. And I think had Trump been sentenced prior to the election, Merchan's incentive would be to impose a prison sentence because, first of all, it's a freebie for him. Trump isn't actually going to prison. Under, New York law about bail pending appeal, the crimes that he was convicted of are not serious enough that it would call for an immediate remand. So to me, this was going to be like a freebie for Merchan in the sense that he could impose a prison sentence to inflate the importance of the crimes of which Trump was found guilty by the jury in the eyes of the electorate. And then the Democrats would have argued, are you kidding me? We're going to elect somebody who's not only a convicted felon, but is facing a prison sentence. And Trump wouldn't actually have been sent to prison, so it wouldn't have been anything more than electioneering. Now that correctly, I think they put the sentencing off until after the election. And this is mainly what's driving this is the immunity issue, which is an issue of Bragg's own creation, since he didn't need to use that kind of evidence in his trial, but he opted to do it. The issue becomes, first, the sentencing gets put off until after the election, which I think changes Merchan's incentive. He really ought to, if he ends up imposing sentence here, he ought to sentence Trump like any other defendant in New York, which is to say, look, everybody knows this case would never have been brought against anyone by Bragg other than Trump. It's just a ridiculous case. And in New York, real criminals who commit real crimes manage to evade prison sentences. So it would be ridiculous to impose one on Trump. But as you point out, Greg, because of the immunity issue, once Judge Merchan rules tomorrow, as he says, on the immunity, the issue will be, can Trump immediately appeal that, assuming that Merchan rules against him, which I believe he will. And I think he should be allowed to immediately appeal that. And that would put the sentencing off for some considerable period of time. Once the Trump team gets into the White House and Trump is running the Justice Department, I expect DOJ to come into the New York courts and, frankly, the Georgia courts as well, and say that under the Supremacy Clause, those cases should be suspended until Trump's out of office. And again, notice I said suspended, not dismissed. Trump is not above the law, but this is a deference that we give to the enormous responsibilities of the presidency. Under the Supremacy Clause, the states are not supposed to take positions that prevent the federal government from carrying out its constitutional responsibility. So I think they'll have a pretty good argument that those cases should be held in abeyance until Trump is out of office.
All right, Andy, well, Donald Trump has got to be pretty happy with the latest deal he's getting from the Justice Department here. But I'll tell you, the best deal you can get right now from Omaha Steaks this holiday season. I've talked about Omaha Steaks so many times. I love everything that comes in the Omaha Steaks box. The steaks are fantastic. They're always so full of flavor, and they're tender. They're so good. Everyone in the family is going to love them. And also the burgers, they're really good sized portions. They're very tasty. Excellent burgers. But there's also seafood. There's chicken. There's wine. There's sides and dessert. But right now for the holiday season, oh man, this deal is also very tasty. Save 50% site-wide at omahasteaks.com, plus get an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML and get a $30 reward card when you shop early. You really can't go wrong. Visit omahasteaks.com and save 50% off site-wide, plus our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML. That's the number 3ML and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with the promo code the number 3ML. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, Andy, on to our second martini here. And again, we're dealing with the legal world. This is from Free Beacon, their version of the story. A military judge reinstated the Defense Department's plea deal with the accused masterminds of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, saying it is, quote, valid, enforceable, and must remain in effect. In July, the Department of Defense agreed to a plea deal with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Walid Muhammad Salih Mubarak bin Atash, and Mustafa Ahmed Adam al-Hassawi that would leave the death penalty off the table. After widespread backlash from lawmakers and victims' families, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin revoked the deal. But on Wednesday, the judge, Air Force Colonel Matthew McCall, ruled it was too late to undo the deal since both parties had already agreed to it. The Wednesday ruling sparked outrage from law enforcement officials and the families of 9/11 victims. And so, Andy, I think that the outrage really goes back to the fact that the government would make this deal in the first place. But what do you make of Austin's efforts to reverse skate really hard there after the backlash was rejected by this judge?
Well, I think that part of it is cowardly. And I also think, the fact that this didn't get announced until after the election, when it was obviously going to happen, tells you almost everything you need to know about this proceeding. This is something where, the Biden-Harris administration actually grappled with a problem in a serious way. Now, let's put aside some long history here where the Obama-Biden administration actually did everything it could to undermine the military commissions, and in large part that project where they tried to defeat these commissions, take the 9/11 suicide terrorists, including led by the ringleader KSM, and try to move them into civilian court. They did that in 2008 at a time, or 2009, at a time when it looked like KSM at least was ready to plead guilty and proceed to sentencing, which would have been execution. And instead, because they had campaigned against Bush and Cheney style counterterrorism and putting the nation on a war footing instead of the Clinton style of using the courts as the point of the counterterrorism spear, as a result of that, the 9/11 case got derailed. And then when it didn't work, that is their effort to get the case brought to civilian court, the commissions got up and running again, but Obama undermined them in other ways, including, trying to make the military commissions virtually the mirror image of civilian due process. The whole reason for doing the military commissions in the first place was that you shouldn't be giving discovery that you have to give under the civil rights due process provisions that you have in criminal proceedings. We shouldn't be giving that to people in wartime who are trying to kill us, who are actually better thought of as enemy combatants rather than mere criminal defendants. So now let me give them their due. I think, as much as I believe that these guys deserve to be executed, my own view of this is that the right thing to do is to plead them guilty and take the death penalty off the table. And the reason for that is I'm concerned that they have too much of their case, the prosecutors, that's reliant on information that they got from these guys under interrogation methods that are unacceptable in trial proceedings. And the problem that they have is that if they lose that evidence, and there's significant pretrial motions that are going on with respect to that, if they lose that evidence, then they may not have a case. They may not have a case that can win even on liability. Forget about ever getting to sentencing. So there's no doubt that these guys committed the acts. They've bragged about it. And there's no doubt that they are never, ever going to be released no matter what happens in the trial. In fact, I kind of think that the whole problem here is this presumption that we owe enemy combatants who commit war crime atrocities a trial before we put them to death, which is something that came up in Nuremberg. I've written a few times, Greg, that Churchill was right in his first impression when they proposed war crime trials in connection with the Second World War, that was a terrible idea. And I think it is a terrible idea, but it's an idea that's now kind of ingrained in our legal system. And the problem is, if you take the position that you have to give war criminals a trial, then you're subject to the due process. I mean, the due process rights are more limited in a military commission than in a civilian trial. There's no trial worthy of the name where you admit evidence that comes from procedures that shock the conscience of the court. That's just not what the Western conception of a trial is. So I thought that they made the right decision to say, we'll take a guilty plea. They agree, basically, it's likely that they'll get life sentences. It's been reported a number of times that they would, they're taking the death penalty off the table and they would get life sentences. That's not guaranteed. In a military commission, the judge does not impose the sentence. The commission does. So you can try to impose limits on what the commission's allowed to do in imposing sentence, but it's up to the commission, which is this panel of military officers that functions as the jury, but they also impose the sentence. But, again, remember, these guys are never getting out, no matter what happens. So the Biden-Harris administration tried to get rid of this problem by agreeing to a plea where they would acknowledge what they did. They would answer questions, if any, from the victims' families, and they would proceed to sentence sometime about a year from now, wherein it was highly probable that they would be sentenced to life imprisonment. And that was a better resolution than rolling the dice to see if you could actually convict them at trial, which might be something of a crapshoot. And that's why we're in this situation. What they realized was that even though that might be the right thing to do legally, it was going to be very unpopular politically. So as soon as they floated the deal and it was accepted, they started to backpedal because of what the reaction to it was. And we were now in the run-up to the election. So they were like, oh, we can't have this. So what Austin tried to do was renege on the agreement that his authorized agent had already made with the terrorists. And the question was, number one, did Austin have the authority to retract the agreement after it already had been a closed contract, in the sense that both sides, including Austin's own authorized agent, had agreed to it? And secondly, was Austin's intervention a form of corrupt command influence under military law? Because he was basically taking the position that no, these guys deserve the death penalty. We're not gonna give them a plea agreement, which is for the Secretary of Defense to do that, especially after consultations with the president. You can understand why the defendants were claiming that it was unlawful command influence. So I don't think it's surprising that this military judge drew this conclusion. I expect it will be upheld. But what people should understand is the whole problem here is, can you get this evidence that comes from these severe interrogation methods? Can you get that admitted into evidence at trial? I suspect you can't. And therefore, if you're committed to the idea that terrorists who are our enemies deserve a trial, they could get acquitted at the trial. So rather than seeing the humiliation of them getting acquitted, I'd much rather have a situation where they pled guilty and got a life sentence. But that's me.
I know the visceral reaction of most Americans would be, if these guys don't get executed for what they did, who does? And
I agree. That's my reaction. That's my entirely. Yes. Why have the death penalty if you can't give it to KSM?
Well, there's a lot of different complicated legal ramifications there, but let's talk about something real simple, and that's keeping track of what you're eating and then how to respond. That's where Lumen comes in. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism just through your breath. It literally is this simple. It really is this simple. All you do is wake up in the morning, grab your Lumen, take a deep breath, exhale into your Lumen, and it'll tell you, are you burning fat or carbs? And then it gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. Look, your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into the fuel that keeps you going. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and even better sleep. It's very, very helpful. It can track a whole lot more than just what you're eating. It's entirely up to you how much you use it with workouts and sleep and everything else, but it is there to make your life as simple as possible in tracking those things and making yourself healthier. If you want to stay on track with your health this holiday season, go to lumen.me/3ml to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/3ml for 15% off your purchase. Lumen makes a great gift too. Again, that's lumen.me/3ml. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. All right, Andy, on to our crazy martini now. And we've had some heavy topics here, so let's get to some fun. Kamala Harris, of course, was defeated last week in her bid to become president of the United States, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't have some ardent defenders out there who don't want to see her go away nearly as much as we do. Bakari Sellers is a CNN contributor. He has a new job in mind for Kamala Harris, and she won't be president. He offered this on CNN.
I hope that Joe Biden makes the next 10 weeks as consequential as he can. I don't care about drawing outside the lines or what Republicans may think about it. This is within your purview. You can actually do it, and you should do it. And, one more thing, John, is you have a hell of a vice president right there who has a legal pedigree to sit on the Supreme Court, and let Republicans go crazy and ape. I'm even mentioning that option.
You're floating. Are you floating? This is 7:39 a.m. on the East Coast. Did Bakari Sellers just float Vice President Kamala Harris as a potential Supreme Court nominee?
Not only am I floating it, but I want to stir up everything. I want people's heads to explode this morning so we go into the weekend just knowing that the chaos has not ended just yet.
So part of this, Andy, is because I guess they want to see Kamala have a new job. Part of it is the whole flashbacks to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who didn't leave when she could have during the Obama administration. And so ultimately she dies, a month and a half before the 2020 election. And Republicans were able to get Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court. So that's part of it. Sotomayor is about 70 years old. She's not in the greatest health, but she has now said that she's not going anywhere. But this did percolate up to Meet the Press yesterday. Kristen Welker asking Bernie Sanders about it. He's 83, so he's of course thinking she's still a kid, and said no, this is not a serious thing. And then Jamal Simmons, a former Kamala Harris aide, says actually Biden should resign and let Kamala be president for the remainder of the term until January 20th. And so grasping for straws is about as polite as you could do it. But what do you make of the Dems trying to shove out Supreme Court justices and replace them and find something for Kamala?
Well, look, I'm an old guy now, so I'm kind of sympathetic to the idea that Justice Sotomayor, like Justice Alito and Justice Thomas and all the other justices on the court, but those are the most elderly ones, they should leave when they're ready to leave. As long as they're continuing to do a competent job, the system makes it up to them when they go. Now, I am sympathetic to the idea that because life expectancy was not what it is today at the time the Constitution was adopted, that the framers took pains in certain positions, particularly the presidency and the and congressional positions, to set a minimum age but not a maximum age. And now that we have people routinely living beyond what may be the period of their lives when they're functioning the best, and where you have a lot of people who live beyond the point where they're up to the rigors of regular employment, we should explore the possibility of having term limits based on age at the outer end, just like we do at the threshold end. But that's not our system right now. Justice Sotomayor, as you say, she's not in the best of health, but she's managing a health situation that she's had her whole life. And as we understand it, she's doing fine. So, if she wants to stick around, let her stick around. It's really up to her. And I'm not saying this because it would be in my interest for Sotomayor to leave now. I'd rather she was replaced by a Republican president. But I'm not meaning this to play politics with it. I mean the same thing with respect to Alito and Thomas. As long as they think they can perform, there might be a certain point where it would be opportune, as far as conservatives are concerned, for them to retire and let younger people be put on the court to avoid the possibility that some, insane lefty president puts on, a couple of extremists from the other side. But I just think that the system says that it's up to the justices when they step aside. And as long as they're compos mentis, then that's the way it should be. And as far as Harris is concerned, I just think it's demeaning in a sense. I mean, the country just had a chance to make her president, and they decided not to do it in a pretty emphatic way. And I think that the problem with the Democrats' identity politics is that it's not that Americans aren't ready to elect a woman president. It's that they were offered a woman who is not particularly good for the job. I can think of a lot of women, for example, Condoleezza Rice is not my particular cup of tea on foreign policy stuff. I'm not as crazy about her tenure as Secretary of State as some people are, but she's a very accomplished person, and I think if she became president, she'd be a fine president, and I would happily vote for her if she was on offer, I assume, compared to whoever she was running against. So that's just one example. But it's not that Americans aren't ready for a woman president. We've had a woman vice president. We have women on the Supreme Court. We've had women in some of the most important cabinet positions in the government. We've had women in Congress. A woman as Speaker of the House. We're not in a position where we don't want women. We just want the right woman. And since Kamala didn't win it fair and square, I would think she wouldn't want to be given the presidency that way. And I don't for the life of me understand why Biden, having not stepped aside all this time when there were very significant reasons to think that he was not up to the job, and having not stepped aside, Greg, precisely because Harris didn't do her job of triggering the 25th Amendment. She's the main actor on the 25th Amendment. She should have done that for the country, and she couldn't bring herself to do it. So at this point, why on earth, with her just having lost the election, would Biden say, you know what, I'm going to step aside and let her become president? I don't think women who care about this issue and Americans who care about this issue, I can't imagine that they want the first American female president of the United States to get it that way, like as an act of charity in the last 10 weeks.
Yeah, it would just be a gimmick at this point. And it's the last thing Joe Biden wants to do. I mean, first of all, there's not going to be a vacancy. Sotomayor has already said she has no intention of stepping down anytime soon. But also, the way he was shoved out, he was clearly resistant to it for weeks at a time. Whether the reports that they were about to trigger or threatening to trigger the 25th Amendment, I don't know. But there's not much question in my mind anyway that he's still very, very bitter about what happened. And you can understand that in a variety of ways, both with Nancy Pelosi and the Obamas. And in terms, and if Harris was ready under this scenario to invoke the 25th, I'm sure he's got no great affection for her, even though he's played it off relatively well in public, I guess, over the last few months. But the idea that now, after he was denied the chance for 4 more years, he's going to give up a second before January 20th, especially like you said before, with Hunter's potential pardon on the table and everything else, he is not going to go for that for a second. He is going to be there every moment till January 20th at noon.
Yeah, I think he cares about his legacy. And the only thing he's done while he's been largely absent for the past few months has been legacy burnishing type stuff, right? But I think he likes the idea that he's the one who beat Trump, that Hillary couldn't do it, Harris couldn't do it. He was the one who could do it. And I think, look, I don't think there's any love lost between these people. As you say, he's carried it off publicly, at least pre-election, about as well as you could carry it off. But man, he looked like he was popping his buttons when he was out the other day, didn't he? I mean, that was the most relaxed and laid back and happy that he's looked in eons. And I have to laugh because Trump keeps saying on the stump, I think the little secret here is that he likes me a lot more than he likes Kamala. I think there might be something to that, but we'll see. Apparently these guys are getting together on Wednesday, right? So I guess we'll see.
We'll find out. I'm sure he did not prefer Trump to Harris from his perspective, but definitely deep down, the fact that, you shoved me aside, me, the only person that's beaten him, for somebody who didn't get it done. There's definitely, given the competitive nature of every politician, certainly that's been around forever, there's part of him that absolutely relished that. No question.
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. I wish I had come up with this myself, but somebody said, maybe they'll finally have that golf game down at Trump and Biden. We'll see who's mano a mano, right?
Exactly.
Quién más macho? Wasn't that the Saturday Night Live skit? I always liked that one, right?
That's right. Oh my gosh, yeah. I don't think Jill and Hunter were too sad about it either. So we'll find out. Anyway, Andy, always great to have you with us, and we'll talk to you down the line.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. He is also a contributing editor at National Review Online, Fox News contributor as well, and the author of Ball of Collusion and many other excellent books I encourage you to check out. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Jim Garrity will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. Andy is at Andrew C. McCarthy. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Monday. Again, thank you to all of our veterans, and join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.